Hello, and welcome to the podcast Justice Unbound about women, religion, and the State of Israel. In this podcast, we take you behind the closed doors of Israeli rabbinic courts, where the state applies religious laws to decide the fate of all Jewish people, men, women, and children. Justice Unbound is written and produced by the Center for Women's Justice, CWJ, and I'm your host, Rivkah Lubitch. Today, we are finally going to get into detail about the mamzerut issue. We've mentioned it a number of times so far in this podcast, but now I will try and spell it all out. I might mention that the problem of mamzerut is constantly at the tip of our tongues, and it actually is in the background all the time whenever we mention agunot. We believe that the mamzerut issue is crucial to understand if you want to fully comprehend the issue of aguna. Well, the connection is pretty obvious. If you're an aguna for many years, you may be connecting with another partner and have more chances of having a baby from another man. That child that is born from this other man who is not your husband, as we will see later, will be thought of as a mamzer, an illegitimate child. But the connection goes the other way around also. The greatest fear of the rabbis when dealing with divorce is that the husband will give the get against his free will, and the get will be thought of as a non-kosher get, which will then lead to the woman not really being divorced even though she has a get in her hand, and the children from her next partner being mamzerim. So the rabbis will be very strict and not allow the woman out of a marriage if there is any suspicion that things are not being done exactly according to the will of the husband. It becomes almost holy, the holy will of the husband. I want to remind our listeners that we've already said in the past episodes that there are basically no clear grounds for divorce, and it all boils down to the husband's will. All this gives a lot of power to the husband and to the Beit Din, the ones to decide if the get was given according to the will of the husband. I think I need to point out that CWJ is absolutely the only organization that ever tried to look into this whole mamzerut issue and take it on as a project. We are also the first to see clearly the way it hurts women and to spell out that it is all about patriarchy and men controlling women's bodies. I've heard people say that the mamzerut issue hurts men and women the same. Well, it doesn't. That simply is not true. First of all, it's all about controlling women's body. Second, it is easier for a man to solve the issue. We may mention that later on. Third, from my experience, it's always the mothers fighting for the children. Men sometimes disappear after they discover that they have conceived a child who is branded as a mamzer. Let's be very clear about our motives in tackling the issue. We at CWJ would like to do away with the whole issue of mamzerut, to find some general solution for it, to make it a non-issue. Just like the idea that somebody driving on Shabbat will get stoned is unthinkable. In the same way, we would like children not to be stigmatized because of who their biological parents are. Frankly, if we believe that we can't solve it on a halachic level, at least we need to get it sorted out in terms of the law. This situation where children are banned by the state from getting married because there is no civil marriage is not acceptable in a democratic, Western, liberal state. So, our plan is to have 2 episodes about this painful topic. We will first explain exactly what a mamzer is, and then we will study the halachic implications. We will go into a number of stories that we have dealt with at CWJ. This episode, Mamzerim Part 1, will be more about the Jewish law, and the next one will be more about the legal aspects of the mamzerut issue in Israel. I would like to start out with the first case I ever dealt with on mamzerut. A man approached me. He was a delivery man in a supermarket. A friend of mine who ran the store told him that I work helping with agunot in the Beit Din, and she made the connection between us. He told me he's having trouble with the rabbanut. I had no idea what he meant. At some point, he hinted to me while we were standing just outside the store that his wife is on some kind of a blacklist and that an important rabbi told him that they can't get married in Israel at all and never will be able to. All the bells in my head started ringing. I then understood that this is not an aginut issue, but a mamzerut issue. It turned out that he and his girlfriend/partner, let's call her Dina, had been to the rabbinate to register for their planned marriage some years before, and the registrar looked at her and said, "You are a mamzerut. You're on the blacklist. You can't get married ever, ever." Let's explain that and be a little bit more precise. We've mentioned before that in Israel, every person that goes to get married is checked by the rabbinate to see if they're on the blacklist. We talked about this list in detail in the last episode, number 12. So, as usual, the registrar sent their names to the Ministry of Religion to be checked out. And when it came back negative, he called the couple into his office and said to Dina, "You are a mamzerut and you can't get married." He then told the couple that they may be able to figure out some solution, but this would happen only through the religious court. At that moment, their whole world came crumbling down on them. Can you imagine this situation? That you discovered that you are banned from marrying anyone Jewish, more or less. You and your offspring forever. This sweet young man didn't leave his partner. The two of them started hunting for someone to save her. In the meantime, years went by. They stopped talking to her mother, who they believed caused the whole thing, because she had conceived her daughter, Dina, before getting divorced from her first husband. They went back to court with an attorney, but got nowhere except a piece of paper saying that she cannot marry, but can go to a higher court who may possibly find some solution for her and make her into a kosher Jew. In the meantime, the couple, Dina and the delivery man, had 2 children who, according to halacha, were also to be considered as mamzerim. That's, by the way, when I first figured out that the number of mamzerim on the blacklist is meaningless, because both her children would get on the list and would be thought of as mamzerim even though they weren't yet technically on the list. That was one of my biggest lessons of being an activist and understanding that academics and most people who see a number don't get it. They think that a number is a number. Only when you work with the people who are considered mamzerim would you understand that her name being on the list means much more than just that one name. Because in back of Dina's name were 2 more children, later to become 4, that were banned and stigmatized just as she was. It was a terrible situation, and it took a good 3 years for CWJ to pull them out of it, to be told at the end of the episode. So what is a mamzer? According to Jewish law, a mamzer would be a child who is conceived by parents who are closely related, such as brother and sister, father and daughter. But it's not only closely related, it can be related in some very specific ways that people aren't really aware of, such as a woman conceiving a child with her husband's brother if the husband, even if she divorced him, is alive, or if he dies and he had a child. Or a man with his sister-in-law, as long as the wife or the ex-wife is still alive. It would also be a man and his aunt parenting a child, whereas a man and his niece would be okay. So that's number 1. Number 2, a child conceived by a Jewish married woman with a Jewish man who is not her husband. That is to say, the mother was married to a Jewish man but fathered a child from another man. This child would be branded as a mamzer. And number 3 would be anyone born to a parent who is a mamzer, even one of them, is a mamzer and all their offspring are. These children are forever prohibited from marrying into the Jewish people. They are allowed to marry another mamzer or a convert, but even so, their offsprings are forever mamzerim, not even to be buried in a Jewish cemetery. I think that the issue of mamzerut is the greatest moral challenge in Judaism, as mamzerim are punished for the sins, or I want to say even mistakes, of their parents without any fault or deed of their own. It's worth explaining at this point that the Torah contains some other morally challenging commandments, such as an eye for an eye, the commandment to wipe out the memory of Amalek, that is, to kill anyone who you know to be Amalekites. Then there's the stoning of the Sabbath desecrators, also killing the rebellious son, or the burning of a priest's daughter who has committed adultery. The sages found ways to circumvent these commandments, making them only theoretical challenges. This is not the case with mamzerut, which remains relevant and applicable to this day. You may ask, why did the sages find their way out of all the other issues and not mamzerut? I don't have an answer for that one, but I guess that the reason has to do with patriarchy and power. I don't think it's impossible to get around the issue of mamzerut. We could say that today we don't have knowledgeable enough rabbis or witnesses to make someone a mamzer. Or we could even say that there are so many mamzerim, and throughout the generations there were so many, that we are all considered mamzerim, and therefore it becomes a non-issue. Again, who is out to benefit from not solving the issue of mamzerut? Or rather, not coming up with a general solution and just solving them or not solving them case by case? I think husbands and rabbis. It gives husbands power over wives, and it gives the rabbis total power over the community when only they can solve this issue. They are the gatekeepers of the Jewish people. Only the rabbis can decide who will be thought of as pure enough to be part of the Jewish people and who is kosher enough to be able to marry another Jew. At this point, I would like to refer you all to a book about mamzerut called Mamzerim Labeled and Erased, edited by Emily D. Bilski and Norit Jacobs-Yinon. It's a catalog of articles and pictures of an art exhibition of the Third Jerusalem Biennale for Contemporary Jewish Art, 2017, and I will leave this in the show notes. And maybe the biggest problem is that the whole mamzer issue is not voiced and understood. Nobody talks about it, hence nobody knows about it. It's all kept as a dark secret. And then, since nobody knows about it and nobody talks about it, everyone thinks that there are no mamzerim. So what happens when a child is born a mamzer? Is it announced in some way? Written down somewhere? The rabbis, just as they promoted this awful situation for the newborn, they found ways of looking away from it and letting it go. So the Jewish sources have rules to try and get around branding a child as a mamzer. Let's go through some of them. The first and most important halachic rule is Rov be'ilot achar habal. Most intimate relations are presumed to be with the husband, from the Talmud in Chulin. This means that even when there is a suspicion that a child was conceived by another man, the child is still attributed to the woman's husband, keeping them within the family framework. This ruling benefited all parties. The child has a home, the woman's secret was kept, the husband avoided disgrace, and the adulterous man was not held responsible for the child. So no matter who the person thinks is their father, the rabbi looking at the papers will say that the father is the man who is the woman's husband when the child was conceived. Another rule is that if a married woman has relations with a non-Jew, the child is not a mamzer, because there is no mamzerut with non-Jews. We mentioned that above. Similarly, the principle that a married woman is not believed to disqualify her son prevents mamzerut from being established based solely on the woman's testimony. Other rulings stretch reality to the extreme. If a husband was away for a long time and his wife gave birth, the Talmud states that a fetus can remain in the womb for up to 12 months. Likewise, if a man returns after a long absence and his wife gives birth, 5 months later, the Talmud declares that a fetus can be born and live at 5 months, all to avoid labeling a child as a mamzer. One halakha is especially hard to comprehend. It puts in the hands of the husband the power to declare that a child born to his wife is not his, thereby making him a mamzer. This is known as the law of Yakir, Din Yakir. Now that the rabbis have this extreme rule, they limited it by saying that when Din Yakir is used, the husband must make this claim at the first opportunity, such as early in the pregnancy. Another way to neutralize the husband's power is to argue that he is probably trying to avoid financial responsibilities to the child and therefore it doesn't hold when he says that this is not my child. I'm going to kind of repeat what I said above. On the one hand, one could argue that the rabbis did all that was in their power to get around branding a child as a mamzer, and that the rabbis did everything possible to save children from this status. But on the other hand, the rabbis never got rid of the mamzerut issue completely. The rabbis did not abolish it entirely, as they did with other severe biblical punishments, such as those we have mentioned above. The threat of mamzerut remains a powerful tool for controlling women's bodies and maintaining social order. So how does it play out? In the past, it was known in the Jewish community if there was a child mamzer. Some sources say that it would be announced at the bris and the baby would be given a special name. We have a testimony from the Middle Ages telling us of a custom to brand a child's forehead with that name so that everyone knows not to marry him. That is absolutely horrific. But on the other hand, the halacha suggests, specifically the Rambam, that a mamzer moved to another city so as to integrate more easily. Again, the dual approach. On the one hand, people are branding babies. On the other hand, they're trying to reduce its practical application to avoid suffering of the innocent person. Nowadays, that doesn't happen. It's not announced when the baby is born, but it's hard to get around it in Israel because there is a list. So when do you get onto the list? A child might get on the list because when the mother and her husband were suing each other in court for divorce, she looked pregnant, and the husband then announced that it wasn't his child. That detail may be kept so that when the child is born, its name would get sent to the list. More often what happens is that when the woman gives birth, she fights to get the biological father's name on the baby's certificate. We will go into that in more detail next episode. Bottom line, when the youngster goes to get married, the rabbis will not only check the blacklist, but also look at the birth certificate, and questions may come up. If they are not sure that your date of birth is 9 months after your mother's divorce, and there is a different man's name on the certificate, they will question the youngster's status, and they may send him or her to the religious court to check it out. Most children branded as mamzerim are because they were conceived by a woman with a man that was not her husband while she was an agunah, either because her husband could not give her a get or would not give her a get. In these cases, there are two ways of solving it. Either we look for a flaw in the marriage and prove that the marriage was void, so that having relations with another man was not adultery at all, and the child born from it was not a mamzer. The other option is to claim that the child is really from the husband or the ex-husband and is not the child of the biological father. We do that with the ruling of Rov Bilot Acharabal that we mentioned above from the Talmud. Most intimate relations are presumed to be with the husband. So let's go back to our story of Dinah and the delivery man. Dinah's mother was an agunah way before she was born. The recalcitrant husband refused to give his wife a get, and in fact, threw her out of the house with a disabled child. She was living with this baby in the streets. That's not Dinah, that's the older half-brother or sister. That poor woman found a man to take her in. They became a family and had a baby girl, Dinah. Dinah's mom finally got her get, but Dinah got in the blacklist. Dinah's father raised her and later died not knowing that Dinah was put on the blacklist while Dinah's mother was pregnant and fighting to receive her get from her horrible husband who threw her into the streets with her firstborn disabled child. Dinah tried lying to the court, saying that her father was not her father, but that didn't work. They all tried lying, Dinah's mother, her grandmother, but they all got tangled up in the lies, and the religious courts never believed a word they said. So how did we solve it? We claimed that the marriage between Dinah's mother and the husband, which took place in Russia, was not a Jewish marriage, so it wasn't a marriage at all. To make a long story short, she never really got married in a Jewish way. They actually got married in Russia, and there was no proof that they ever got married according to Jewish halacha, which would save the daughter Dinah from mamzerut. However, the rabbis got caught up in the question of whether a civil ceremony in a place like Russia, where a religious marriage was not allowed, maybe makes it become a religious marriage. Oh my God. It was crazy. The Beit Din dragged us along for years, forced the pathetic ex-husband, the one who was still alive, that's the first husband, to be brought in against his will, questioned him, trying to prove that he had sex with his wife after they were separated. And then they finally decided that Dinah was kosher because, number one, her mother was never really married to this first person. And number two, because her father may have been this ex-husband, as in Rov Bilot Harabal. With that decision, the 4 children that she already had with a delivery man and she herself were saved from mamzerut. This was a heartbreaking story, even if it ended well, and I'm not happy at all. Please stay tuned for next time when we will get into the legal problems in Israel for anyone suspected of being a mamzer. Thank you for listening to CWJ's podcast, Justice Unbound, Women, Religion, and the State of Israel. This podcast was produced thanks to the generous support of the Gimprich Family Foundation. Thank you, Susan Weiss and Rachel Stomel, for all your help. I am Rivkah Lubitch. Bye.